For the past 6 months, accused murderer Luigi Mangione has been transient, moving from place to place without a permanent address. All that's changed now, with Mangione's new address, 1100 Pike Street in Huntingdon, Pennsylvania, at the State Correctional Institution. For 1 week, Mangione has been behind bars there, at the oldest operating prison in all of Pennsylvania. And meanwhile, his apparent motive and disturbing manifesto are drawing comparisons to Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber. So who better to talk to than Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, a former corrections officer for the Unabomber himself and an expert at what conditions Mangione now faces. His case begins on Wednesday, December 4th, when UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson was shot and killed in Midtown Manhattan. The 50-year-old CEO was in New York for an investors meeting and early that morning was making his way to the New York Hilton Midtown. That's when Thompson was gunned down in broad daylight. Investigators later found bullet casings on the scene, scrawled with words like deny and delay. Right away, the search was on for this suspect who was caught on security camera recordings in the area of the shooting. Over the next few days, more and more images of the suspect were released, and they were everywhere. Social media, local news, and even right here on Law&Crime. Then, on December 9th, a McDonald's customer in Altoona, Pennsylvania recognized the suspect. He removed his mask for security camera video 2, where you can see Mangione eating a hash brown. Soon after this, Altoona PD were called and 26-year-old Luigi Mangione was taken into custody. At the same time, authorities collected the evidence Mangione brought into the McDonald's with him: a fake ID, a ghost or 3D gun, Faraday bags, some medical masks, and a notebook. That notebook has been a big talking point as of late, some even comparing it to a manifesto. Inside were alleged messages written to federal investigators explaining how Mangione apparently carried out the shooting, later writing, quote, "I do apologize for any strife of traumas, but it had to be done." He went on to say, quote, "Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming." A reminder, the US has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42 in life expectancy. It became evident quickly that Mangione has a problem with the United States healthcare system, and we've since learned he had a spinal surgery before the shooting and lived with chronic back pain. Following his arrest, Mangione was charged in Pennsylvania with forgery, tampering with records, possessing instruments of a crime, and false identification to law enforcement. In New York, he's charged with second-degree murder, 3 counts of criminal possession of a weapon, and 1 count of possession of a forged instrument. But he's not in New York quite yet. At a court appearance just last week, Mangione contested extradition to New York. So for now, he's staying put at the State Correctional Institution in Huntingdon, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles east from that McDonald's where he was arrested. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, and if you're out and about running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about this free app called Upside. It gets you cash back on daily essentials. I now use Upside every time I pump my gas because it's so easy and free. Here's what you do. Download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. Just pay as usual and then follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. So what is life on the inside really like for Luigi Mangione? We're bringing in an expert to figure it all out, Dr. Dwayne Hendricks, a former correctional officer and warden. Dwayne, thank you for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, my first question about Luigi Mangione when he is behind bars: why isn't he in the county jail? I mean, usually that's what we have happen. Blair County Jail is where he would have gone, but instead he's at this kind of intense prison 40 miles away. Why may that be?
Okay, so according to reports in June of 2025, the Blair County Jail was overcrowded. Their rated capacity is 325 inmates, and their population was around 384. And also, lately, there have been reports that their county commissioners have been looking for land or additional space to build a new facility to accommodate the number of inmates that they may have at any given time with the cases that they may have going on with the county. So in those instances, what the county sheriffs normally do is partner with their local correctional or other law enforcement partners, and in this case, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. And now he's being housed at, I believe it's the oldest operating prison in the state of Pennsylvania. In my experience with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I activated FDC Federal Detention Center in Philly in 2000. And prior to that facility opening, the Eastern District of Pennsylvania would house federal pretrial inmates at the Federal Correctional Institution in Farrington, New Jersey for a number of years. And that's a logistical nightmare when you're driving, 60, 70 miles one way back and forth to get people back to court. So I believe that is the reason why Mr. Mangione is in the custody and care of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections.
All of that does kind of make sense. I mean, prison overcrowding or jail overcrowding, as you pointed out, is something that we hear about a lot. So obviously we want to make sure there's not too many inmates there. We want to make sure everyone's safe. But for me, I was thinking this is a very high profile case. And now we know based on reports that he is in a cell alone. He doesn't have a cellmate or anything. Do you think that's another reason that he could be going to this higher security prison because this is a case that all eyes are on?
Exactly. And we don't know exactly what his physical, his mental, and his emotional state is. So it would make sense that he would be housed away from others or have limited access from others. Now, from my understanding, he's not in solitary confinement because I know as a profession, most correctional administrators are trying to get away from putting individuals in solitary confinement unless it's for safety and security and orderly running of a facility, because when folks are in solitary confinement for an extended period of time, which he would fit in that criteria because, they're still trying to figure out what his status is, how long he's going to be in Pennsylvania before he's possibly extradited to New York. So they probably are housing him in a unit, but keeping him away from others until they can do like what I would call a threat assessment to see, would he be okay to interact with others and others to be okay to interact with him.
He isn't in solitary confinement, but the other part you said is correct too, that he's having limited interactions with other inmates. So what do you think his day-to-day could then look like? If he's in a cell completely alone, I know that the DOC mentioned that inmates do have time outside if they so choose to use that time. But what do you think his day-to-day may look like?
Probably, in the morning, get up, have breakfast. I'm sure medical staff are probably entering his unit, to check on him and other inmates to see if there's any issues that that need to be addressed. I'm sure he's probably having some interviews with law enforcement, maybe not every day, but I'm sure at some point in the day, he's probably being interviewed. And I'm almost certain that psychological staff, team members are probably making rounds on a daily basis, along with the executive team members are probably monitoring all of his activities. And I'm also certain that I'm sure he's probably given some limited recreational time, whether it's, taking him to the recreation area or in a certain unit, they may have an area where he may be able to, have a little bit of time outside of his cell. So that's probably what his day-to-day is looking like right now.
What's interesting about this case is everyone is talking about it, even people who are already inmates at this prison. We've seen reports that they are shouting Luigi's name. They know who he is. Some people are saying, get Luigi to New York. These conditions aren't good enough for him. I mean, a lot of wild things that are being thrown out there. But could that be another reason why Luigi Mangione is being kept aside, potentially for his protection, because he is a high-profile guy?
Yeah, and there's a balance here because I've seen reports that he's been given support online based on what the allegations are, which is a little bit different. But also inmates are just trying to be a part of the action. I did see a news report last night where a news anchor was doing an interview outside the facility, and I could hear other inmates shouting, saying, "Oh, his conditions are poor," and that kind of thing. So a lot of it is just attention seeking and just trying to be a part of the process.
Yeah. I actually was there just this week to kind of take a look at what I could see, and I did hear inmates yelling too. So it does seem like they want to make their presence known. That kind of leads into my next question too, though. You mentioned this. This is the oldest still running prison in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. A lot of people are wondering, are the conditions poor? I mean, this is something we talk about whenever a high-profile inmate is taken into jail or prison, whatever it may be. What do you think? I mean, they wouldn't have it open if it couldn't function, right?
Right, exactly. Now, of course, prisons, like a home or a building is not made for continual water running, toilets and showers and lights on and different things of that nature. So there's always a need for maintenance, things that needs to be fixed to keep the infrastructure, to maintain the safety and security and the orderly running of a facility. But I will say the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections have been a starlight in the corrections profession throughout the years. So I have no doubt, and they're probably maybe the oldest correctional system in America. So they've always kind of been a beacon of light from what I can remember and studying and living and working in Philadelphia for a few years. So I believe that, yes, this is and it's not the oldest facility that they've ever had, because they've had other facilities, hundreds of years ago. So I don't think there's any real issue. They wouldn't have placed him there if they didn't think that the staff there could to take care of business. So because there are other institutions in the state of Pennsylvania that he could have been housed. So there's obviously some credibility there for them to actually say, hey, Sheriff, we'll take him in, just bring him here, and we'll make sure that we partner with your deputies and work in conjunction with the state of New York, because I know they're actively working to try to bring him to New York as quickly as possible.
It seems like all roads always lead back to Pennsylvania. I feel like I've covered so many stories there that are high profile. So it's interesting that we continue to talk about this part of America. But let's step away from Pennsylvania for a second. I wanted to talk about Ted Kaczynski. A lot of people know him more as the Unabomber, and he is being compared to Luigi Mangione now based on their MO, their manifesto, all the things like that. But I wanted to talk to you specifically because you kind of have a connection with Kaczynski. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah, so in 1997, when I was in my first year as a correctional officer at the Federal Detention Center in Dublin, California, he had been arrested, and the Northern District of California housed him there at the jail for a few months. And I remember being a young correctional, and I actually studied him when I was an undergrad, because they had been looking for him for a number of years. I mean, they had the little profile, but they didn't have a picture of his face, just someone in a hoodie. So it was very interesting to kind of be around him, take him out to recreation, monitor him in his cell. And this is before technology where cameras were everywhere in prison. So our facility staff had to build and mount cameras in 2 different cells in the special housing area, because we had to rotate a cell every 21 days. And he was very quiet. He only spoke when spoken to, and only addressed you when he needed to be addressed to. And I always found it weird that he would be in his cell doing math, like he would create math problems. So when we go in to shake down, he'd just sit there and he'd be doing math, creating math problems and stuff like that. But in terms of comparison, I would say the only thing that would compare to him thus far is their ideology and the fact that he was kind of wanting to mirror him. But obviously he was only out there for like a week or less than a week before he was apprehended. So it'll be interesting to see as this case progresses, because Ted Kaczynski eventually was convicted and was housed at the Supermax, the most secure prison in America, in Florence, Colorado. So it'll be interesting to see if he is convicted of these crimes, would he be housed in a maximum security prison with limited access to other inmates as well as staff, and being on lockdown pretty much 23 hours a day up until Kaczynski passed away in recent years. So I would say in that regard, but their behavior thus far, because Kaczynski was really calm and quiet, and from what I'm seeing from this gentleman, yelling out to reporters when he was being escorted by staff. So I'd like to be able to kind of learn more about his mental state and what he's going to be doing, as this progresses.
I think a lot of people are trying to draw parallels because we want answers. We want to know a motive. So we know about the Unabomber. He was studied for years. We've seen documentaries, so we kind of know it. Maybe we're trying to connect to understand what Luigi Mangione, his motive was. And that goes into the next question I have for you, his mental health status. What would it look like for the officials there who are hoping to, make sure that he is of sane mind, that he shouldn't be on suicide watch? What would all of that part look like?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, on a daily basis, I'm sure psychology staff are probably there interviewing him, just trying to get it to understand, his personality. And then, I don't know if they may end up doing some sort of study on him, not just in terms of if he needs to be diagnosed with some sort of mental disorder or mental health concern, but they may end up doing a study on him as well. So I think, and then having the parallel with law enforcement coming in and communicating his attorneys and family. So it'll be interesting to see if his family does attempt to visit him, because, from what I understand, his mom hadn't spoken to him in several months. So that all of that's going to play into his psyche. So it'll be interesting to see if he stays detached from his family now that he's incarcerated and isolated. So this is going to be an interesting conversation to have as this develops.
And we're, of course, talking about Pennsylvania because that's where he is in SCI. He's got his charges there. But the more severe charges really are the ones out of New York. That's where we've got second-degree murder. And what we're talking about here is extradition because New York wants him back there. And Pennsylvania, the prosecution wants him back in New York, too. So experts say it's only a matter of time before Mangione is transported from Pennsylvania over to New York. When that happens, what would it look like? Because as you pointed out, we have seen him outside of the courthouse being violent, yelling things. I mean, when he came into the courtroom that I was sitting in, there were at least 10 sheriff's deputies surrounding him at that time. So what would the extradition process really look like?
Okay, so when he was arrested in Blair County, Pennsylvania, there in Altoona, on local charges, felony and misdemeanor. So I was a legal instruments examiner before I got into management doing sentence computation. So when we're talking about primary jurisdiction, the Blair County Sheriff's Office have the first crack at him based on those charges that he's facing right now. The only way that they would lose primary jurisdiction is if he bails out, if he escapes and someone else arrests him, or there may be an interstate compact agreement between the states of New York and Pennsylvania. So what probably will happen, they're going to try to figure out, are they going to, charge him and convict him on whatever the local charges are in Pennsylvania first. But I'm sure the New York state officials are working on what we call an interstate agreement on detainers. So as soon as they, decide what they're going to do in Pennsylvania with those local charges, they would have a detainer on him, because I know he's got a bail hearing later this month. So they want to get that paperwork in and work with the record staff along with the state of Pennsylvania. So that way, as soon as they are able to hand him over to New York, he will go there and face the more, like you said, the more serious charges for the murder of the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, Mr. Thompson.
Well, Dwayne Hendricks, thank you so much for coming on with us today and giving us a look what life on the inside may be like for Luigi Mangione.
Thank you.
Luigi Mangione is due back in court on December 23rd for a preliminary hearing, and after that, he'll be back in court once again to discuss bail on December 30th. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.